Matthew chapter number 15. Good to be in church tonight, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
Good to be saved, isn't it? Good to see me, isn't it? A little slow tonight, a little slow. Well, we took a little detour this morning for Anniversary Sunday, but tonight I wanted to come back to Matthew and finish chapter 15, and then I'll be out of the pulpit for a couple of weeks, and then sometime in June we'll get back in chapter 16. It kind of breaks right there. So Matthew chapter 15, I want you to look at verse 29. And Jesus departed from thence and came nigh unto the Sea of Galilee, and went up into a mountain and sat down there. And great multitudes came unto him, having with them those that were lame, blind, dumb, maimed, and many others, and cast them down at Jesus' feet, and he healed them. Insomuch that the multitude wondered when they saw the dumb to speak, the maimed to behold, the lame to walk, and the blind to see. And they glorified the God of Israel. Then Jesus called his disciples unto him and said, I have compassion on the multitude, because they continue with me now 3 days and have nothing to eat. And I will not send them away fasting, lest they faint in the way. And his disciples said to him, Whence should we have so much bread in the wilderness, as to fill so great a multitude? And Jesus saith unto them, How many loaves have ye? And they said, 7, and a few little fishes. And he commanded the multitude to sit down on the ground. And he took the 7 loaves and the fishes, and gave thanks, and brake them, and gave to his disciples, and the disciples to the multitude. And they did all eat, and were filled. And they took up of the broken meat that was left 7 baskets full. They that did eat were 4,000 men, besides women and children. And he sent away the multitude, and took ship, and came into the coasts of Magdala. A couple of weeks ago, we were preaching from the great miracle of the feeding of the 5,000. Just in the chapter before this, Jesus had been preaching to a great multitude. There was no food for them. He took a little boy's lunch, turned it into a buffet, fed 5,000 men plus the women and the children that were there. In the very next chapter, we come to a miracle that is very, very similar. It's called the feeding of the 4,000. It's often called the forgotten miracle, because if you're going to preach from one of them, then obviously you would preach from the miracle of 5,000, because that's the greater or the bigger miracle. It is, as far as I can tell, the exact same miracle, except the numbers are a little bit different, and there is no mention of the little boy giving his lunch to the Lord. So in this case, we don't know where he got the food from, but it's fish and bread, just like before. He feeds a multitude, just like before. And so everything that can be said about the feeding of the 5,000 essentially can be said about the feeding of the 4,000. So the first question that we have to ask and answer when we approach this story is it the same miracle, or is it a different miracle? Some commentators take the approach that the two stories are actually just one story. That Matthew and Mark tells about feeding of the 5,000 and the 4,000, that basically they're telling the same story twice. Or that the 4,000, the feeding of the 4,000, is simply made up. Now, if it was a made-up story, and I don't believe that it is, then it wouldn't make sense for the feeding of the 4,000 to be the made-up story, because it is the smaller miracle. If somebody's going to tell a story, then they usually make it bigger than the truth. So why retell the same story with smaller numbers? Because that's not going to impress anyone. So that's one reason why I don't think that it is the same miracle. When you compare the account of the feeding of the 5,000 and the feeding of the 4,000, there are several things that are different. In the feeding of the 5,000, the crowd was with the Lord for 1 day. The feeding of the 4,000, the crowd is with the Lord for 3 days. The feeding of the 5,000, there are 5 loaves, 2 fish. Feeding of the 4,000, there are 7 loaves and a few fishes. The feeding of the 5,000 happened near Bethsaida. feeding of the 4,000 happened, I believe, near Decapolis. The feeding of the 5,000, 12 baskets of fragments remain. Feeding of the 4,000, 7 baskets of fragments remain. And so that's enough to tell me these are two different miracles. If you hold your finger here, I'll give you conclusive proof in Mark's account, Mark chapter number 8. And in Mark chapter 8, I want you to look at verse number 19. This is after both miracles are told. The Lord having a conversation with his disciples, and he references these two miracles. Mark chapter 8, look at verse number 19. And he asks the disciples a question, when I break the 5 loaves among 5,000, how many baskets full of fragments took ye up? They say unto him, 12. When the 7 among 4,000, how many baskets full of fragments took ye up? And they said, 7. So it's very obvious that they are separate miracles. So the next question is, then why record both of them? When you consider that the feeding of the 5,000 is the only miracle that's told in all 4 Gospels, and then you consider the feeding of the 4,000 is told in Matthew and in Mark, that makes 6 times in the Gospels that you have the same story or a very similar story. And surely whatever is taught in the first miracle, surely is taught in the second miracle, so why teach it again? And teachers will tell you that the point of repetition is repetition itself. Repetition is a teacher's trick. You go over the same material over and over. And in repetition, it is not to teach something new. It is to teach something missed. And the Lord teaches his disciples some valuable lessons in the feeding of the 5,000. But it doesn't mean that they don't need to learn that lesson again or that they didn't get it the first time. So he performs a second miracle very much similar to the first miracle, and I believe it is not necessarily to teach new lessons, but it is to go back and teach missed lessons. So I look at this miracle, feeding of the 4,000. I accept it is a completely different miracle, very similar but different. So what is the Lord teaching in this miracle? I'll give you 3 parts to it. First of all, I want you to notice very simply tonight what he did. Notice what he did. The miracle takes place in a desolate place. There are no villages, there are no population centers nearby. The people have come from a great distance to hear the Lord and to see his miracles. And they've come far enough that they can't just go back home at the end of the day. Because they have come from considerable distances, they have stayed. I imagine them camping out, and it is now on day 3 that they have been in this place listening to the Lord. And the problem is that none of them thought that they would be gone that long, and so they didn't bring any food with them. You have to understand that in that day there's not a McDonald's on every street corner. You can't just run down to Subway or Zaxby's and get lunch. You have to bring that with you. So when they get to their destination, there's no food there. They stay longer than they expect, I suppose. And so it comes on day 3, and all the food is gone. They've traveled a great distance. They're in a desolate place, 3 days listening to Jesus, and there is no food. Now that's remarkable to me on one account. It is remarkable to me that they must have really wanted to hear what Jesus had to say. They must have really needed a miracle. They must have been really interested in his teaching for them to deny themselves a meal or 2 just to be where Jesus was. I could draw an application tonight to you and I would love to see that kind of desire in this day. In fact, I wish that you could see that kind of devotion to church, where folks would deny themselves creature comforts just to hear the Word. I know in America it has to be carpeted and padded and air-conditioned and just right. 72, not 73, not 71, somebody will complain. It's got to be perfect. I know that in America that we look for excuses. We try to find a way, and so it would be a wonderful thing to have that spirit of, I will deny myself whatever comfort, I'm going to be there. You know, it had not been too long ago that the Lord had fed the 5,000, and so in this miracle he employs the same operation. He has the people sit down on the ground. He takes the bread and the fish in his hand. He breaks it. He blesses it, gives it to the disciples, and they pass it out. There's a couple of minor differences in how the Lord did it. In the feeding of the 5,000, the Bible said that he had them sit down in companies of 50. In the feeding of the 4,000, they just sat down on the ground. The feeding of the 5,000, obviously 5 loaves and 2 fish. Feeding of the 4,000, and this blesses me, and I won't tell you why until I get to the end. He had 7 loaves and just a few small fishes. Now I have to tell you that there is no humanly way possible that that small amount of food is enough to feed everybody. So the disciples ask a question with the food in hand. The question they ask is, whence should we have so much bread in the wilderness as to fill so great a multitude? Now that is actually a good question, and it's also a very bad question. It's a good question because it states the obvious problem here, and it is, where are we going to find enough food in this wilderness to provide all of these people a meal? That's a good question. It's a bad question because they had seen him do this very thing just a few days earlier. So why didn't one of them say, "Whoo, we're getting ready to see this again. Boys, sit back. We're getting ready to see this thing happen twice"? That's not what they said. Now I've got to tell you that there is no question that this miracle is a demonstration of the creative power of Jesus Christ. Because what the Lord did is he took bread and he made it into more bread. He took fish and he made it into more fish. In fact, here's what I would say. Jesus didn't feed 4,000 people with 7 loaves and a few fish. Because 7 loaves and a few fish is not enough to feed 4,000 people. So what the Lord did is he took 7 loaves and turned them into thousands of loaves. He took a few fish and turned them into thousands of fish, and he fed the multitude with what he had created. I said this when I preached on the 5,000, but I have to repeat something because the miracles are so similar. But basically what the Lord did is he created bread from grain that had never grown. I don't think that he gave them raw bread or just dough. So he gave them baked bread that had never been in an oven. He served them fish that had never been in an ocean. And he didn't give them live fish. He gave them dead fish, cooked fish. Fish that had been cooked, cleaned, filleted, tartar sauce on the side. And so what he has done is he has given them, he creates fish that are already cooked. And it's not a parlor trick. This is not hocus pocus. They sat there, and what those people got to see was a little bit of what happened in Genesis chapter 1. They witnessed the creation of bread, and they witnessed the creation of fish at the hand of the Creator. And how could anybody walk away and say that that man is not divine? What he did. The second thing that you need to know about this is where he did it. Where he did it. Well, last week when we talked about the woman of Canaan, the Syrophoenician's daughter, we noticed that the Lord had left Palestine and he had gone north into Tyre and Sidon. And I'm not sure, but he probably spent a month, maybe 2, some commentators think, up in that area, up in seclusion. And most of his time is spent just with his disciples. And I know of 2 specific miracles that he performed during this time, only 2. And though he did heal many, but 2 that are specifically mentioned. Mark tells us that he's in the area of Decapolis. Decapolis was on the other side of the Jordan in what is now called the Kingdom of Jordan. Decapolis was an area of 10 Gentile cities. It was very pagan in Jesus' day. And there's some controversy, but some Bible students believe that the audience for this miracle was largely Gentile. Matthew has Jesus coming near the Sea of Galilee, then going into a mountain. Mark has him going to Dalmanutha after the miracle, which is Jewish territory. And so I've looked at a map as close as I can, and it's not conclusive either way. But I believe that the difference in the feeding of the 5,000 and the 4,000 is the audience that he fed. I believe in the feeding of the 5,000, it is primarily a Jewish audience. In the feeding of the 4,000, it is primarily a Gentile audience. Now, why does that matter? Because during this brief time of the Lord's ministry, he has led his disciples into Gentile territory. And what you read is that the Lord had as much compassion on the Gentiles as he did on his Jewish brethren, and he performed as many miracles and healings for them as he did for the Jews. He doesn't preach a kingdom message there, but he does perform a number of miracles. And it has to impress the disciples that the Lord would take such care for those people. Because there's no love lost between the Jew and the Gentile. It was a day when the Jew walked into Gentile territory. Before he came into Palestine, he would knock his shoes together and knock the dust off of his feet so the defiled Gentile dust didn't come into Palestine. But what the Lord showed his disciples was that personal biases have to be set aside, and you have to have true compassion for all men. He brought his disciples into Gentile territory to get away from the Jewish throngs, and while he is there, he gives them a very vivid example of compassion. This is the compassion that I want you to have toward other men. I was thinking the last couple of the days, and I mentioned this to some of the men in the prayer group. In the independent fundamental Baptist circles that we run in, I suppose that we're a part of, if we're a part of anything. I know right now 4 or 5 churches that are really suffering. I know church right now, and I'm talking large churches. I know a church where the pastor's just been arrested for not reporting accusations of sexual misconduct with some of the leaders of the church. There's a church right now out west going through a huge storm. I know a number of churches right now that I either know the pastor or the church or whatever that's just going through just some incredible trouble, and a lot of it is self-inflicted. And it brings a black mark upon independent Baptists as a movement. Whether they're right or whether they're wrong, I hate to see it on social media and all, because then all of the critics of IFB, here they come running. I think that one of the things that fundamentalists have been known for so long is we've been known as fighting fundamentalists. And I understand that. I understand that there are some things that we still must fight for. But I think that in our fighting fundamentalism, we have forgotten how to love people. And any time that we mention love, we have to make sure that we follow that up by saying, no, we're not talking about compromise. And we always have to counter it with the reassurance that we're not changing anything, as if love is compromise. And I believe that we should still be fighting fundamentalists and fight the compromiser and fight the liberal and fight the modernist. But I wonder if we wouldn't reach more of the world if we were known as loving, compassionate, kind fundamentalists than just fighting. I can tell it's going over like a lead balloon, but I still believe that. So what he did, where he did it, here's the third thing that you need to know. Why he did it. Why the 2 miracles? Why repeat the miracle? Why? And there's 4 reasons I give you. First of all, and I mentioned this, he gives them a lesson in divine compassion. He tells you why in verse number 32. In verse 32, then Jesus called his disciples unto him and said, I have compassion on the multitude. That's why. He sees their plight, he sees their hunger, he sees their predicament, and his heart goes out to them, and he says, by the way, that is the only place in the Gospels where Jesus says in the first person that he has compassion. There's a number of times where the Gospel writer says that he had compassion, he was moved with compassion. This is the only time that I can find where Jesus says in the first person, I have compassion on the multitude. And that's remarkable for 2 things. For one thing, it is remarkable because these are not his people. These are not his family. These are not his friends. This is not the Jewish brethren. And as a man, he knows none of them. As a man, their problem is not his problem. And see, it's easy to hurt with those that you love. And it's easy to turn away from the plight of those that you don't know and those that you don't love. It's remarkable, secondly, because he's God. And the world had never known a deity that had compassion on humanity. You see, every false god is an invention of Satan. Would you agree with that tonight? Every idol, every false god, every false religion is an invention of the devil, and the devil doesn't have any compassion. So any deity that he manufactures is a reflection of him, his heart. Therefore, he cannot create a compassionate God. Well, you see what the Bible says about my God. Psalm 78 and verse 38, he, being full of compassion, forgave their iniquity and destroyed them not. Psalm 88 and verse 15, but thou, O Lord, art a God full of compassion and gracious, long-suffering, and plenteous in mercy and truth. We read these miracles, and I look for the hidden secret. I look for the message, the story behind the story. And surely there's a deeper lesson that the Lord is teaching. But remember, hundreds, if not thousands of miracles are grouped together many times, and there's no spiritual lesson to glean. And I believe the reason why he does that is because he looks at the blind, he looks at the lame, he looks at the deaf, and he feels sorry for them. And he has compassion for them. I told the men in church, a couple of months ago, we got a phone call in the office. A lady called me from another state. I said, I have a friend that lives here in Milton. She's Filipino, doesn't speak the language a lot, and she's looking for a church to go to. I called it out to the church one night. I said, I need somebody that would pick up a lady at church. Sarah Berg came to me. Sarah has been picking her up and been bringing her to church. Her name is Chari. Charlie without the L, Chari. She's been to church a number of times, always sits back in the back when she comes. Chari is was a full-time caretaker for a gentleman in town. And this gentleman's name is John. John had cancer, not given long to live. And Chari took care of him. That's her full-time job. John was lost. And they called this week. She called this week and she said, hospice hasn't given John many days to live. I'd like for a preacher to come see him. And so Wednesday night, I set the appointment. Wednesday night at 5, I was going to go by and see John, and then I would come to church after that. About an hour before I left, I got the message, John don't want to see you. John doesn't want to see no preacher. So I didn't go. And so yesterday morning, started getting the messages, hospice come in, he's got less than 24 hours. Would you come see John? And so yesterday afternoon, I went over to the house, knocked on the door. Chari let me in. I went back to the bedroom, saw John. John was laying on his bed. John was just trying to get another breath. And John had no response. Couldn't even recognize us there. I said, if you can hear me, would you blink your eyes? John, no recognition, no response. And so I pulled my chair up to the bed. And I said, John, I'm a preacher. I'm a Baptist preacher. And I said, I didn't come for small talk. I came to talk to you about eternity. And I don't know if you can hear me, don't know if you can understand me. But I'm going to tell you a very important thing. And so about 10 or 15 minutes, I just preached the gospel to him. And I said, John, I don't know if you heard me, I don't know if you understood me. But if you have in your heart, I implore you to turn to Christ and trust Him before you go into eternity. I prayed, and Chari was crying. She's been taking care of him for a year. That's all that we could do. John died this morning. And I can't guess where he's at. But I'll tell you what it did. It was more for me than it was for John, probably. Because I walked away and my heart was broken and I was in tears because I knew that I was talking to a man that unless a miracle happened in just a few hours, he would slip into eternity without God. And I pass out tracts, the gas station, the restaurant. But I don't know that I always do it with a broken heart. Very rarely with tears in my eyes. And God broke my heart over my lack of compassion and tears for the lost. Where are you at on that? How much compassion, concern do you really have if the world dies and goes to hell? Do you care? Do I care? And see, when the disciples said, "Whence should we have so much bread in the wilderness as to fill so great a multitude?" Strange question. Because just a few days earlier, they watched the Lord do this with 5,000. They had expressed their doubt. 5 loaves, 2 fishes is not enough. But they saw that it was in the hands of the Lord. So now they're in a similar situation. Jesus asked them, "What do you have to work with?" And that's when they say, "Whence is this enough?" And I thought about, can they really be questioning the power of Christ to do this? That doesn't make sense to me. And Brother Stark, I don't believe that they were asking if you can. I believe they were asking if you will. Because nobody speaks up this time, "What are they among so many?" No, nobody says that because that question has been answered. The question is not, can he do it again, but would you do it for these Gentiles? Because a Jew wouldn't eat with a Gentile. A Jew wouldn't touch a Gentile. A Jew wouldn't enter into a Gentile's house. That prejudice runs so deep. And Jesus is teaching them, Jew, Gentile, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. The need is the same. I have the same compassion for them as I did for my brethren. It's a lesson in divine compassion. Secondly, there is a lesson in divine sufficiency. In the feeding of the 5,000, there are 12 baskets of fragments that remain. The feeding of the 4,000, there are 7 baskets of fragments that remain. Somebody asked me the other day, and I'll be honest with you, I don't know. I have always assumed in the feeding of the 5,000 that the 12 baskets of fragments went with the 12 disciples. I've always assumed that. I have no biblical basis for that. But why 7 baskets, and what became of the 7 baskets? If you've ever studied biblical numerology, the significance of Bible numbers, and we've done a little bit of that here, and it can get really wild and hairy. But in Bible numerology, the number 12 is a Jewish number. In Genesis chapter 12, the first Jew, Abraham, is called out. In Exodus chapter 12, it is the beginning of the Jewish nation. That Jewish nation came out of the 12 sons of Jacob, which formed the 12 tribes of Israel. Jesus calls 12 Jewish disciples to preach the kingdom to the nation of Israel. The breastplate on the priestly garment had 12 stones. It represents the 12 tribes of Israel. The feeding of the 5,000 is performed, I believe, to a primarily Jewish audience. Significant. 12 would be a significant number to them. 7 is the number for completion or for perfection. God completed the creation on the 7th day. The word created, by the way, shows up 7 times in Genesis 1 and 2 to signify it is a perfect creation. On the Day of Atonement, the high priest would sprinkle the blood on the mercy seat 7 times. It represents the completeness of the redemptive work of Christ. The book of Revelation is going to bring history to completion. And in that book, there are 7 bowls and 7 seals and 7 candlesticks and 7 spirits and 7 churches and 777. And 7 baskets of fragments would be saying that the people are completely satisfied and that in Christ there is spiritual satisfaction. And the message in both miracles is that Christ is enough to meet every need of your life. There's a lesson in divine sufficiency. Thirdly, are you still with me? Say amen. There is a lesson in divine resources. When you read these miracles, the inability of the disciples stands in stark contrast to the ability of Christ. And the number of people in both miracles, I believe, is really irrelevant. There were 4,000 men besides women and children, so commentators try to conflate the figures. How many people were there really there? 4,000 men. If every man had their wife there, that's unlikely, but if they did, that's 8,000. If they all had 1.5 kids, then we're about 15,000 people here, all right? But I really believe it doesn't matter. Because if there had been 40 men, just 40, it was too many for the disciples. The disciples would not be able to feed 40 men just with 7 loaves and a few small fishes. However, if there had been 40,000 men, it's still not too many for the Lord. It's not like the Lord looked at this and said, hey, y'all count them before I try to do anything here. How many do it? 4,000? 4,000. Let me see. You know, it'd be close, but I think maybe we can pull this off. No. I don't think that that's how it is. It wouldn't have mattered how many men. I believe if there had been 400,000 men, it doesn't matter. Do you understand that? It is totally irrelevant to the resources of the Lord. And no matter tonight how small the task, without the power of God, you're not able. No matter how large the task, with the enabling of God, you are able. That's why I said in Luke chapter 18, the things which are impossible with men are possible with God. In fact, can I give you something this morning that just blesses my heart? It blesses my heart. The Lord can actually do more with less. The less He had to work with, the more He accomplished. Feeding of the 5,000, 5 loaves, 2 fishes, 12 baskets of fragments. Feeding of the 4,000, less. 7 loaves, few fish, 7 baskets of fragments. He fed the 5,000 with less than what He fed the 4,000. And the lesson is not that you should give as least as you can to God. It is that God is not bound by the amount that you have to offer. In fact, the weaker you are, the more dependent that you are on Him, the more He can do for you and through you. There's a lesson in divine compassion. There's a lesson in divine sufficiency. There's a lesson in divine resources. I've done. There's a lesson in divine worship. I remind you, in John 6, feeding of the 5,000, when Jesus performed the miracle, what did the Jews want to do? They wanted to make Him king. And that sounds good, but we've already seen it was a selfish request. They didn't want to make Him king because they had submitted to His lordship and His authority. No, they wanted to make Him king because, hey, if He can perform all these miracles, give us free food, He can surely overthrow the Roman government. If He can do a miracle like this, we will have it made. This would be better than Trump and everybody else. This is going to be a good thing. And the day after the miracles, the Jews come back to Him in Capernaum, and Jesus preaches to them a message about the living bread. And here's what it says, that many of His disciples went back and walked no more with Him. Instead of coming forward, they went away. I mean, one day after He performs the greatest miracle in the Gospels, the crowds who wanted to make Him king are walking away. That is representative of the attitude that the nation of Israel had toward Christ. Feeding of the 4,000. Gentiles who don't have any law, no covenant, no promise, no privilege. They are simply heathen who are idol worshipers, and their life is in a big mess, and they don't have a lot of theology down, but they have seen what the Lord can do for others, and they've seen what this man can do, and they may not even know His name, but they know He's divine. Do you know what happens after the miracle? Look at it, Matthew 15, verse 31. Insomuch that the multitude wondered when they saw the dumb to speak, the lame to behold, the lame to walk, the blind to see, and they glorified the God of Israel. That's the difference between this audience and the Jewish audience. They gave Him the honor and the respect and the reverence that He deserves. It's a similar miracle. It's a great miracle. So close to the feeding of the 5,000. It's a separate miracle. Different audience, different responses, different lessons. And the lesson is that the Lord is a Lord of compassion. And I know tonight that I need more compassion in my life. So I'm going to tell you, I have compassion for my needs. Oh, I do. But I don't have as much compassion for the needs of others. And a lot of times we get jaded in life. And we're quick to cast blame. Well, this is the reason why he's in the mess that he's in. What does it matter? The Lord's example is to see people who are genuinely hurt and to have a heart toward the hurting. He's a Lord of compassion. And he is a Lord of sufficiency. And it doesn't mean that if you made a big mess, he's going to come in and just erase all of your debt and fix all of your problems. But he can provide all of your need. He's all that you need. He's sufficient for your satisfaction. He's sufficient for your service. He's sufficient for your salvation. And the miracle tells me, piano player, come, that he's worthy of our worship. I was talking to somebody this week, I think Eric was having lunch. And I was talking about how in the last couple of months, how that the Lord and just my daily walk has really been filling my heart. You know how you get up and you sing a song and you hum it throughout the day? Just driving down the road, and there's just a lot of that. Yesterday I got up and you know how you get a song in your mind and you can't get it out? So yesterday going down the road I was singing Away in a Manger. And I thought, I don't even like the song. I don't like Christmas. I don't know why. Just singing. I come to choir practice. I come to choir practice because I love to watch Marcus Hannon do choir practice. You ought to come. It's great comedy. It's great. And they were practicing the song that they sang this morning. And I got teared up in choir practice. I had to leave. Just thinking about my Lord. And it's the Lord that my meditation has been sweeter and has been on the things of Him. And that He's worthy of my worship and He's worthy of my praise. Don't go a day without conscious meditation on the sufficiency of Christ. And let your heart be filled with the love of the Lord. Would you bow your heads with me tonight? If you need to come on. She's playing right now. Would you come? God speaking to your heart. Come on. Just step out and come. How's your compassion tonight? How's your compassion? Do you care? Come on tonight. Only trust Him. Our heads about our eyes closed. Listen to me now. Listen to me. If you're here tonight and you do not know Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, there'll come a time somebody visits you on your deathbed, hours away from eternity. Please don't wait until that time. Please don't wait. And if you're here tonight and the Holy Spirit's wooing you and drawing you, telling you tonight that you need to be saved, would you step out tonight? Would you just come? Let us take a Bible, show you how to be saved on this Sunday night. Would you come?